Hi, how are you? I got my party cups, yeah. Even though yours is non-alcoholic. Sorry. That sounds beautiful. Thank you so much for coming, everyone, on this wonderful spring day. Um, Welcome to the. Oh, sorry. We are live streaming today, just an FYI. So later on, if you want to ask a question, we're going to ask you to hold the mic so that everyone can hear you. My name is Ingrid LaFleur. I'm your host for today. Thank you for coming to the Future of Food. We are we have this wonderful panel with Shane Bernardo, food justice activist, and Sean Kennedy, who's part of Spartan Blockchain, which is part of MSU. Before we get into the conversation, I just kind of wanted to lay out the landscape and put things in context for a little bit. First, I want to know how many of you know what blockchain is? Okay, cool. Crypto? Sweet, we got more hands for crypto. And who knows about EOS? A good number of you guys. Sweet, sweet, sweet. It's so nice to see all these new faces in the audience. Okay, great. So first, I just want to do a quick explainer about blockchain. So since most of you know about crypto, um, blockchain is basically the technology behind the crypto. It makes it work, essentially. A good way of thinking about it is it's a digital ledger. You know, like accountants and or you might have like your own you're listing your own transactions like in a checkbook, except it's digital. So a good way of thinking about it is if you have a Google Doc. If you use Google Docs, everyone can contribute to this doc and you can see the contributions, but with blockchain, no one can edit it. And so therefore, it's transparent in this really wonderful way. And what makes it immutable, uneditable, is the cryptography behind it. And that's what makes it secure. So for the purpose of this conversation, we just need to remember that this is a digital ledger that holds all the transactions and that everyone basically can access, but no one can edit. And so this creates like a level of trust when you're dealing with in different transactions. Uh, with EOS is a blockchain that was created and launched in June of last year. And EOS is probably like, I like to say, like the last or the latest, biggest, baddest blockchains. So you got Bitcoin that was started in 2009. And then after that, you have Ethereum. Some of you might have heard of Ethereum. And then you have the Cadillac of blockchains, which is EOS. And what makes EOS really unique is that it's a governed blockchain. And that means that the token holders have a say in how the blockchain operates, essentially. We can like get deeper into that later if you have more questions. But for those of you who don't know blockchain, I don't want to confuse you too much because we're here to talk about the food industry. So one of the major things that we're seeing with blockchain and its uses in the food industry is in the supply chain. So with the supply chain, you can basically trace food in all of and in all of its production. So, just like a couple of, just a little bit of comments on different uses within the food industry. So you have like food safety. We all know about those recalls, right? And that happened, I think it was 125 last year. So with blockchain, contaminated food products can be detected really quickly on the shelves and quickly removed. And then you can find the food origin point quite quickly. It reduces transactions and fair pricing. This is something that you see an issue in the global south more so. So the blockchain provides an open platform for both supplier and buyers to negotiate reasonable prices for their goods. Suppliers can make direct mobile payment transactions to the buyers, so it eliminates brokers. Retailers, farmers, and manufacturers can claim premiums on of some products being used because of that. And then also you have the global south having easier access to the international market. Um, then you have a food waste issue. Researchers say waste is set to increase by a third in 2030, when 66 tons of food will either be lost or thrown away per second. Um, which is interesting. The UK aims to halve food waste by 2030. And this is because there is a lack of standards for reporting and measuring food loss and waste. And so the blockchain can better assess that. Um, let's see. Widespread adoption of digital supply chain tools could reduce food loss and waste by up to 120 billion dollars annually. And then when it comes to food fraud, food fraud is a global business exceeding $10 billion annually. Food fraud has increased 60% over the last couple of years due to the lack of transparency, accountability, and effective regulations. 10% of the food system affected by food fraud can occur across raw material, ingredients, products, and packaging. And then you have brand trust. So this is like a little more capitalist. So 84% of shoppers consider the impact of how and where food was produced when making a purchase. So, um, so now with the blockchain, you can show consumers a food's origin, when it was grown, and how. And also, when it comes to brand loyalty, they say that 55% of people say that they were going to switch brands if there's a recall. Uh, and so the reason that I talk about brand trust is that we're seeing companies like Wal-mart and Sam's Club basically pushing their leafy green suppliers to be on their blockchain that they're developing with IBM by September. And so that sounds great, right? Because we've been hearing the recall on romaine lettuce and spinach, and so like that sounds really great. But what's going to happen is this is an opportunity for Walmart to reframe their brand and say that they are more ethical, right? When we know that that's questionable. So in terms of using the blockchain to do all of this, the tracing of food's origin and the production of it is really great, but it is going to be used to boost brands at the time. So I hope that context. I do have some other examples, but we'll get into that in a second. I want to get started with questions. So I think I'm going to start with you, Sean. Sean Kennedy, you're the Chief Technical Officer of the Spartan blockchain at MSU, but you're also working with land grant goods. Can you tell us a little bit about Spartan blockchain and land grant goods?
Yeah, so Spartan Blockchain is a student organization on Michigan State's campus, and our goal pretty much is to promote blockchain education and adoption for people who don't know much about it. And another thing that we're looking to do is work with outside companies who are looking to implement blockchain in some way into their company. So one of the first engagements we have was with a student-run company called Land Grant Goods, and what their business is, they take locally sourced products and things like honey and tea that then they source them from local beehives, and then they sell them either direct to consumer or to local markets. So what we're trying to do with them is create a end-to-end blockchain software solution that allows them to track their products at every point in the supply chain, and then allow their consumers basically to see where their honey was at every point in the supply chain, and to check different key metrics about that honey, whether it be like temperature, pH, moisture content, so that they know that their honey is safe and that their honey is locally sourced.
That's amazing. I really like that. And where are you guys at with this? At what point?
So we're kind of in the middle stages of the software development, kind of transitioning now from the back end software development to the actual front end interfaces and getting hardware that would make it easy for the land grant goods employees to just do these things quickly. So like scanning products rather than manually entering things, because as you know, manually entering information into the blockchain can cause issues given the nature of blockchain being immutable. So we're just looking to eliminate all possible sources of friction from the process.
Wow, that's super interesting. Thank you. So, Shane, you're founder of Food is Healing and you're a food justice activist. Can you tell me a little bit about your work?
First, let me start by thanking EOS Detroit for hosting this great event and for having me on as a panelist. Um, my name is Shane Bernardo. I'm a long life Detroiter, and I really don't use the label activist to describe me. Uh, I'm just someone that cares a lot about what I do. And I'm no different from anyone else here in the audience or anyone watching online. I got into this work because it's very personal to me. My father transitioned to ancestorhood due to chronic health disease, and he had the hat trick of chronic health disease. He had obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. And fortunately, he passed away due to all of those happening at the same time, and then finally passing due to kidney disease. So I got into this work looking for other answers, and um, what I found was that a lot of the chronic health diseases come from our lack of connection to where our food comes from, our lack of connection to the land, and the lack of connection to the people that are growing, preparing, and serving our food. So I'm here today to hopefully maybe make some connections between what this technology can do for the food movement here in Detroit. That's such a great question. I'm not in the industry, so I'm like in a very precarious position because I consider myself like a very grassroots person, and one of my main things is trying to make things more accessible, especially for those of us that have been left out of the equation. When I first heard about blockchain, I didn't see a whole lot of folks like me associated with the face of blockchain, so it kind of turned me off. I was like, what is this about? But then as I started hearing more about it and maybe some of the things that are coming out today, I've since changed my attitude about it. And so, in terms of like the potential for blockchain in Detroit, there's huge potential, but only because of the history of organizing work here in the city, and that's what makes me so excited about it. Is because um, Detroiters are. Can we cuss on this live stream? Okay, Detroiters are resilient as fuck, um, and I mean that with all my heart. And when you take a look at everything that we've had to endure, like um, the white flight out to the suburbs, where a lot of businesses um, took a lot of jobs and infrastructure and tax base, leaving those of us that couldn't afford to move to rot. We've had to then make a living. So that's what spawned a lot of things like the urban ag movement here in Detroit. And that one of the things that makes me so hopeful about the future is seeing people creating their own solutions to a massive systemic disinvestment. And so Detroit is like a place like no other that has an opportunity to really adapt some of the ideas and the spirit and philosophy behind blockchain and really run with it because of our history around organizing, because of our history around social movements, and just our attitude of like not not waiting on people to save us, basically. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I mean, maybe the piggyback on my own statement, which is kind of funny thing, um, is that what makes the idea of blockchain so attractive to me and our history around social movements here in Detroit is our massive distrust of institutions and systems and structures that have failed us. And again, I'm speaking from a very personal perspective. My family lost our home to subprime mortgage, predatory lending in 2007, 2008. I, after that, I pulled out all of my money out of the big banks and invested into a credit union. Now, because of the blockchain wasn't around that time, so I probably would have dumped more money into the technology if I had known more about it or if it was even around. But I mean, the um, hearing about blockchain and the spirit of how it came out after the crisis, the financial crisis, and how that lent more transparency, more trust, more relationship building, which is the foundation of social movements here in Detroit, is relationship building. Um, there's a really rad group out of Oakland, California called Movement Generation, and I've been to a few of their trainings around a just transition, which has been applied to issues like climate change, which food justice issues are very much a part of that that larger conversation around climate change. And one of the things that they said that has really stuck with me is that the smallest common denominator to any movement is not a person, but it's relationships. And this is what blockchain this is what makes blockchain works because it makes relationships it makes facilitating relationships that much easier. It makes facilitating trust that much more easier between people that may not have even any knowledge of one another. And so with the history of having mistrust but also having a history of creating our own solutions, I think the marriage between blockchain and social movements, and particularly in Detroit, is is one that's ripe for this time right now.
Is a student organization that is to promote blockchain technology specifically. Uh, do you think that land grant goods is a way to raise that awareness for such a young generation?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we really focus on is ways that we can, because we're doing the educating part, but it's a whole other monster to be able to actually reach people who wouldn't hear about us otherwise. So we do absolutely everything we can to try to reach as big of an audience as possible. And with the Land Grant Goods Project, that's a great way for people to see blockchain being implemented in a way that they can understand the value that it adds to something. So it's one thing to just educate people on the history of blockchain or what it is from a technical perspective, but to be able to actually implement something that people can see and understand is something that's really important to us and something that we think will go a long way in actually helping the community understand what blockchain can do.
Uh, what do you see in terms of the future?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this will be something that every one of us, when we go to a grocery store, will be able to scan our goods and see
Mm-hmm.
where things are coming from?
That might be wishful thinking, but it's also possible. Like you talked about, what Walmart is doing, that's something that if if you look at what they did with IBM, they went from taking like a mango, and it would take them 7 days about to track where that mango came from. But after implementing IBM's food trust system, it took them 2.2 seconds to see exactly what farm that mango came from. So, just in terms of if we could do that for all of our products in a way that we can actually trust, that could be a huge win for everyone. However, saying that, it's a there's a difference between traceability and actual provenance. So you can have the ability to trace something and see the data that's in the blockchain and what it says, but it's a whole another thing to be able to prove that what the blockchain says is really true. So even if you can scan like a QR code on some food and it can tell you a bunch of information, that has to be information that we know is true. So it's kind of a double-edged sword in that we need to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is the right way rather than just doing it to kind of like you said promote a brand or to make something seem safer when it really isn't.
Right, because like right now we have organic food that might not be organic or
Mm-hmm.
fair trade that might not be fair trade.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So we would still be facing that issue.
Right.
Hmm. And I'm just curious, one last question for you. um, in terms of, because you're a senior,
I'm a junior.
junior
Mm-hmm.
in college,
Yeah.
um, I'm just curious, do you see this as a movement? And is that your relationship to crypto and blockchain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, I mean, it's a movement that you can see in terms of big companies looking at like Walmart, IBM, JP Morgan. It's a movement in that perspective where big companies are starting to understand the value of it, but it's also becoming a movement in communities where they can't necessarily trust a single point of authority. So if you look at countries where their government is either corrupt or just crumbling or their monetary system isn't properly supported, you can see the ways that blockchain can revolutionize the way that they live and revolutionize the way that they understand money.
What do you think in terms of we have so many urban farms here in Detroit? What are good uses for blockchain?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Um, so I guess could you describe more what you mean by urban farms?
Yeah, we have like Oakland Avenue Farms up
Uh huh.
the street, and so they sometimes work with Malik Yakini's farm.
Mm-hmm.
I know that they're friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, in terms of like farms working together
Uh huh.
and interacting, would blockchain technology be useful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you look at, I mean, if you look at just what we're doing with laying rent goods, you can see the value in tracing things, understanding where they're coming from, and then also when you have kind of a network of different participants interacting, like you said, there's multiple urban farms and then kind of different people managing them. That's another place where blockchain can add a lot of value. Just being able to track things in a more efficient way.
Shane, do you have ideas on how like local farmers would want to use it?
Yeah, and I think to understand this is we can't look at um, the potential for blockchain uh, with the current understanding that we have with conventional supply chain physics. Um, what the what's going on in Detroit is something that is not seen very often. And what I mean by that is that in Detroit, the reason why the urban farming movement is so important is because we've, as residents, have said, fuck this, this is fucked up. I'm not going to stand for it anymore, and I'm going to create my own solution. We didn't wait on anyone to save us. And when Farmer Jacks left and that became the last major chain grocery store in Detroit. People were like, well, do we just like complain and then just shop in the suburbs? I mean, we still have some really great independent grocers here, but we have all this land because all the white folks left to the suburbs, and now we have all this land. And like, okay, what are we gonna do with this? Where businesses and residents used to be, we're gonna grow here. So there are folks like the Guardian Angels and Jared Hairston, and and folks that said that we're gonna take this upon ourselves and create our own solutions. And so, what I meant by my earlier statement is that we can't we truly understand the greater potential of blockchain and its adaptation to the uh, food movement here in Detroit is because the precedent that Detroit set with the urban farming movement is that we went from a consumer to a producer. That is huge. Now, that is huge because we're creating our own economies. We're orientating to the economy in a much different way, that we go from a passive participant to an active participant. And then we start creating our own value. And so, what that means for Detroit and farmers in Detroit that uh, start to adopt um, blockchain early on is that we can have a bigger say in the direction and trajectory of this technology as it continues to evolve, and it's still in its nascent stages. I mean, Bitcoin's only been around for what 10 years, I think. So there's still a lot of room for this technology to evolve, and Detroiters are the best people to imagine what this technology could take form because we've already set the precedent of doing away with what didn't work with us and creating something in its place.
Indeed. So this makes me think about DAX, digital autonomous communities. This is a really awesome concept where basically it's a digital cooperative. So it's a collective of people who have their own shared vision, and they gather together and they use uh, different blockchain tools to basically make any interaction and basically attending to that vision more efficient. And so DAX right now, we are seeing them on a global scale. But EOS Detroit, we really want to create one on a local scale. And I'm thinking that this is something that farmers might be interested in, or those of you who are food entrepreneurs could be interested in, depending on what kinds of goods that might be shared upon with each other and how you want to like move things. Within a DAC, you can also create your own token, your own cryptocurrency, and that can be valued and used in the way that the DAC decides. You can also vote on things within a DAC, and it can be very transparent and immediate. And so there's a lot of benefits to it, and it sounds like this could be something that could support the initiatives and that resiliency of Detroiters.
I'm sorry, was that a question? uh, well, I agree with all that. I mean, really, when you look at an urban farm, the farm and the produce that it makes is really um, um, an outcome of the community that's already there. And the the urban farming community is really small. Um, Really, everybody knows everybody. Partly because of the some of the networks. There's there's relationships of circles relation of circles of relationships within other concentric circles, if you will. And so there's those of us that see the potential for urban farming as a blueprint, if you will, to to adapt to other basic needs. And so folks have taken upon themselves to see like, whoa, what's going on with urban farming? this is a game changer, and they're lending that model to creating our own institutions of learning. We're creating our own institutions of energy. We're creating our own institutions of governance. And that increased level of autonomy is being facilitated by these relationships of having a common struggle of being left behind, but also wanting to create a new future.
A new future indeed. Neil, I saw your hand up. Phil, do you mind grabbing a mic for me?
Thank you. So I want to prompt you with a slightly different question, because one of the ideas that I have is that with blockchain in the food system, what it will enable in ways that I think are very difficult now would be for a small farm, for example, to develop a reputation and become known for the quality of its products. This is a double edged sword, but if you go into Sam's Club today and buy spinach, you have no idea where it came from. And maybe there's good spinach and bad spinach, and no doubt Sam's Club must do some sort of quality check on that. But I'm interested in your perspective if you could imagine a day when there was complete transparency, so that if you as a consumer go into Sam's Club and buy spinach, you would know exactly where it was grown. And then if over time it became apparent that spinach from Detroit was better than spinach from Georgia, hypothetically, and what that would mean for producers and the supply chain and how companies think about branding, etc. I mean, because I think that blockchain will enable that. It'll be sort of a second order effect. But I'm curious if anybody has a perspective about what that might mean.
So if you look at kind of just how society is structured today, it's kind of just all about like a power struggle basically, and you have these hierarchies where people in power, they can do things that people with less power can't do. And if you look at the potential for blockchain and what it can do, just in if we look at food specifically, I really think blockchain can take some of the power that central authority figures have, and it can return it to individuals who don't traditionally have that power. So just looking in terms of like local farmers, you're really taking some of the power away from big players like Sam's Club, and you're returning it to the farmers in the form of like what you said, brand recognition and things like that. And that's a pretty specific thing in the food industry. But if you look at just anything really where people are forced to rely on central authority for protection or resources, I think blockchain really eliminates that need for trust, and it can really empower a lot of communities to be able to do the things they want to do without relying on other things that could potentially fail them.
Thanks for the question. I don't really don't think there's any comparison because when you start to really be critical about um, conventional industrial scale agriculture, it's what it's producing is not things commodities like spinach. What that system is good for creating is scarcity. It creates scarcity because it creates profits for corporations. It creates scarcity by pulling minerals out of the soil with conventional industrial methods. It creates scarcity by not paying their workers a living wage. It creates scarcity by creating other methods of exploitation that makes it profitable. So what makes this idea uh, of decentralizing and not relying on a middle entity or intermediary is that now growers in Detroit, small scale farmers, can, in terms of reputation, people already know Detroit. Um, Whether it's like the urban farm movement, like I helped run a small urban farm in Detroit for about 7 years, and we would get people from France, we would get people from Germany, from Italy, from all over the world, just to see what was going on here. So reputation is the least of my worries. I think my main concern is gaining what the opportunity has for farmers here is to enter markets that we have traditionally been left out of. That is the biggest opportunity, I think. And Detroit is already a brand. When you look at the multiple, I couldn't count it on two hands, like how many people are marketing Detroit that aren't even in the city. That pisses me off to no end. And when you think about the innovation that has already happened here around not just the auto industry, but look at techno. I mean, people fawn over techno all over the world, including places like Germany and France. Like our name is already out there. The and when we talk about like social movements, our name is already out there. So reputation to me is like, yeah, that's great, and that lends itself to marketing, but that's really the least of my worries, especially when um, there's already been huge concerns around like foodborne illnesses and how that system, that conventional way of consuming and selling goods, has already failed us.
Any more questions?
Hi, can you hear me? Because I can't. So you complain about low wages for farm workers, right? But low wages are connected with low prices, and customers in this country only want low prices. So to have high wages, the food must be more expensive. So are you willing to pay $10 for a loaf of bread?
Thanks for the question. Um, that's actually a falsehood too, because the way that the food system works here in the U.S. is that the fruits and vegetables are considered specialty crops, so they're not subsidized by the federal government. And so there's actually more money and subsidies and grants allowed to like tens of millions of dollars or even hundreds of millions of dollars secured in the farm bill for cash crops. So your sugar beets, your wheat, your soy, and those things. And so it gives this false impression that food needs to be cheap. We are actually not paying the full price of what it takes to grow food. And so we have in our minds that we're convinced that food needs to be cheap. So I tend to push back on that, and that there are better solutions. And I think adaptation to this technology might take some education. So I think events like this are really great. I also think policy is also going to play a role. In particular to the food system, we need a drastic overhaul to way food is subsidized, as it speaks to the large conglomerates that are benefiting on both sides of the coin. And what I mean by that is they're benefiting from these massive subsidies in the federal government, but they're also benefiting from the food product that is being sold at a very cheap price, a lot of which is being used with, unfortunately, food stamps. And so they're benefiting from that equation that is falsely created by the federal government that gives subsidies for cash crops and the creation of food product. So I think we need to change the way that we look at the problem, because it's not the problem isn't the problem, is the problem is how we think about the problem.
We have
Hi, can you hear me?
yes.
Okay. My name's Kate Devlin. I've been growing in the city of Detroit for 30 years. Thank you, Shane. I was very happy to see Shane on your panel tonight, because when I think of food in the future, all the great things Shane talked about, with technology, I feel there's a potentiality that we could be co-opted by big businesses, and that urban farms could turn into grow lots that are like freight cars, or what are they called? Containers, those big containers. And one person works in there, and there's all lights, and it's a closed system, and they kick out all this food, and then they have the high rise growing. They like take over our old factories, and then the Detroiters who have been growing to grow for community and who could possibly benefit for those potential jobs will be locked out of that because there's a big digital divide here in the city. And people who are growing food basically don't have time to be on the blockchain. So I'm just pointing that out. And how can technology work with and people who do the technology come on the ground and work with farmers to help lift us up to a point where we could use this technology and to protect ourselves. And so I don't know if that's a question or a statement, but that's what I got to say.
I think it's a really great statement, and the digital divide is something that we speak about a lot. And that is one of the missions of EOS Detroit, is to increase the digital literacy here in Detroit, because we don't want people to just participate or just own crypto. We really want people to be more sophisticated and have a deeper understanding of the technology and how it works, so that they may innovate and shape it so that it fits our own needs, ethics, and values, and our own future vision. Um, we are a community-centered company, so we would be willing, and definitely, I can see Rob already, our CEO, really excited about the prospect of being on the ground with the farmers and making that happen. But we wouldn't come to you unless we have the tech ready. And I will say that everything that we're talking about is still in like experimental phase. A lot of it is still in the very, very beginning. And so what we're talking about is how people or how different companies are experimenting and trying to work out all the problems. As Sean pointed out, we can trace things, but we might not be able to know the origin necessarily. So we're still trying, we still have questions that we need to answer before we can come to you and say, here's a tool. But when we come to you, it's going to be a toolkit that is like, hopefully, a plug and play. We're not trying to make this really a difficult situation. We do know how Detroiters are working tirelessly to survive and then hopefully manifest their own dreams. So as a result, these conversations are for us to start planting the seeds so that you know what's happening in your industry that you're working in or participating in, right? And I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that the Wal-marts and the IBMs of the world, there's JP Morgan, it goes, the list is really long of the really large companies that have co-opted the technology and how they're using it and how that can eventually affect our everyday lives. But we are getting to the point, hopefully, sooner than later, where we can sit down with all of you and say, hey, so this is a product that we think can really help protect you, help hopefully create more value, and bring more economic opportunity to the work that you're already doing.
Kate, thanks for your concern. It's a concern of mine as well, especially when we already have a precedent for the food movement here in Detroit being co-opted by Hans Farms. They're trying to weasel their way in acquiring land over at the Fiat Chrysler assembly plant over on Mack and Jefferson. So we're not new to that conversation. We know that that goes on. And we already have like big retail giants, like you already mentioned them, Walmart. I didn't want to mention them, but we already talked about them. Yeah. IBM is creating their blockchain, and it's called the IBM Food Trust. And so they've essentially placed themselves in the position of it being an intermediary with a technology that doesn't need one. So we really need to think critically, and we need folks like you to stay active in this conversation and to make sure that it is being used to the most integrity and with the values that we hold dear to our hearts, because this is what we need. This is our livelihood. This is how we make. This is how we put food on the table. So we can't let this conversation get away from us. We have to stay in the fight, and we have to use it to our advantage, because no one else is going to come in and save us.
Any other questions? Rob?
Hi, thank you, Sean, Kate, Ingrid, and I'm sorry, Spartan Blockchain. Um, I love everything that you've discussed. It really resonates. I think that all technology can be used both for great prosperity and abundance, or to propagate uh, existing systemic oppression. So definitely just wanted to reaffirm what Ingrid said about we want to be as transparent about the technology and help everyone understand it to the greatest of our abilities, so that we can make sure that as these blueprints get laid, that nothing goes awry, and that it always retains that central focus on being a self-sovereign system that's for the people and governed by the people. So we're actually designing the DAC in stealth over the last 6 months with nonprofit and community leaders that Ingrid's assembled, that are from all different parts of Detroit, to make sure that from the beginning that we've included stakeholders who've been here in the city for decades and decades, and not just coming to prescribe some new technology on people that without understanding. So we need to continue to reaffirm that that's super important, and also invite more into the conversation through these meetups and otherwise. It's, we're talking about totally rewiring the socioeconomic fabric locally to serve people, and that's huge. And Detroit has the resilience for it, and the grit and all of the existing precedent, as you were saying, Shane. So thank you for the discussion. Just wanted to say, like, totally agree with all of that.
And our DAC that we're working on now is to support Mesh Network, that has been going up in all over Detroit, and we want to start there, because broadband access is like step one to eliminating that digital divide. We want to make sure that everyone has access, not just to any kind of internet, fast and affordable internet, so that then we can have the developers, and that is on our list as well. So as with a DAC, it's run by the people for the people. They make the decision. So we literally are helping to create it, and then we're going to be backing away. But when we back away, we want to make sure that everyone has the skill set necessary. So we will be having like free developer classes, so that people can learn how to be a developer on the EOS blockchain, and be able to hopefully run the DAC on their own efficiently without our help. Um, so that is like the autonomy, and we really believe in that. And definitely, as a Detroiter myself, um, I definitely agree with the sentiments that you guys have been making. That is really important that we retain and increase our power, right? We don't want to just maintain the power we have. We want to increase it, so that we can definitely serve our communities in the ways that we want to, and we know that they want to be served, right? Because we're part of those communities. Thank you, Rob. Anybody else have a question? No other questions? Okay, awesome. Um, I just wanted to like give a couple examples really quickly of what's happening. If you haven't already done your own research about this, we have the Dairy Farmers of America, who's adopting a blockchain powered kind of project for their food supply chain. So these are, they have millions and millions of dollars to market, right? Because this is a cooperative. So we're gonna probably be seeing how, like, they get to talk about like the ethics and the freshness of their milk supply and their dairy. So we probably will be seeing that soon. Um, in Holland, the largest supermarket chain is using blockchain already uh, to trace orange juice, and so that's being implemented as we speak. Um, in Zambia, you have the AB InBev. It's a brand of beer that uses cassava, and they found out that the smaller farmers were barely making any money on cassava. And so they've been working with local farmers to basically make sure that there is a higher level of record keeping, and that's where the blockchain comes into play. And then also, we're dealing with underbanking in the global south is a big issue. So this is a way that we don't have to deal with people having to have a bank account, right? And they can create these transactions without that. Um, and what else? And then the one that Shane sent to me, which is Tony's Chocolonely. Have you guys seen the big chocolate bars? They're really pretty. Okay, they're usually high end, um, and they are pretty expensive. And I think it's probably because they're trying to end the child labor and modern slavery that has been going on to basically um, produce the cocoa beans and the farmers because they aren't getting paid that much. It's basically a slavery that has been created. So that's Hershey and everybody, all those big chocolate companies are just sucking out all the resources and not paying for that. So this particular company has created Bean Tracker, and it basically is a value chain platform that goes from bean to bar, and it digitally logs the journey from of that bean turning into the chocolate, so that then ethically that these beans are not coming from this kind of slave system that has been instituted. Uh, and so it's just a way of, yes.
There was just an announcement this morning, which many people may not have seen yet. A company called Beef Chain just got venture capital financing. I don't recall all the specifics of it, but as the name implies, it's a blockchain solution to track, product through the supply chain of beef all the way back to from the cow to, where the meat winds up.
Oh, that's really great when it comes to beef, especially we got mad cow disease, we got all kinds of issues when it comes to meat. Ooh, a supply chain for meat. That would be really good. So any announcements that you want to make? Wait, no more questions? Okay. Any announcements? Any events with Spartan Blockchain?
Not any events upcoming in like the spring and the summer, but we're looking to do like a big community event in the fall, just to bring together people in the Atlanta community, the Detroit community, Ann Arbor, um, bring people who are interested in learning about the technology, just to have discussions, kind of like a fireside chat. So that's one thing we're planning for the fall. Um, but other than that, the only thing that I really have to say, just kind of general comments, is just that blockchain really has this unique potential to empower communities that have traditionally had to rely on figures of authority and they're forced to trust them. And blockchain really eliminates that need for trust and returns power to these communities and lets them do the things that they want to do, whether it be governance or finance, whatever, in a way that they no longer have to trust people who can let them down. So that's really what excites me about blockchain, and it's really what makes me want to educate people on blockchain so they know just exactly what potential it has.
Is there a way for people to follow Land Grant Goods, the
Um,
project at all? No?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
once we get going a little more, we'll probably be, posting some things. If you want to follow Spartan Blockchain on social media, you can. We have Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. So that's one way to follow us. Um, yeah.
I don't have any announcements of any future events, but if folks want to take my website down, it's foodashealing.com. And I post all my events up there where I'm speaking or any workshops or conferences that I'll be at. And my Instagram is at 313 Filipinx. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean and Shane. Uh, oh, Neil? Sure, go for it.
Ethereum group, I think it's called, is having a meeting in Ypsilanti. Yours truly, I'm speaking not on blockchain specifically, but more on how technologies get adopted. And then there's also another speaker who, regrettably, I'm sorry, I don't recall his name, but he runs a DAX, a distributed exchange. So there will be the two presentations, and that's a week from. What's that? Maybe. I apologize. I don't know him personally. From Total, that's right. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a week from yesterday in Ypsilanti. Just
What is
Goop.
it? It's called what again?
It's the Michigan Ethereum meetup. So just Google any of those words, and I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding it.
Okay, awesome. So we have a couple of announcements. If you want to get a wallet, an EOS wallet, we have some codes. Token Pocket. It's on the table over here on the right that says EOS Detroit. You can just grab a sheet, and all the instructions are on there. And it can, and we also, you can also ask us any questions that you may have. And then we also have these really lovely cards. These are Steam monsters. Steam is a blockchain that's like a predecessor of EOS, actually. And with this code, you can open a Steam account and you will be gifted a little bit of Steam as well. So they're on the table on the right. And sure. And I just want to give a big shout out to Red Door. We love you so much. Yes. Thank you yet again for hosting us. We really appreciate it. We love it here. And I think that's it. Yes, I knew the CMI would have some. Maybe. So we'll be participating in Detroit Startup Week. We will have our crypto cafe, like we had last year, is a full week of events, and we'll be talking about blockchain technology, cryptocurrency. Each day is a different topic, so watch out for that. Please sign up and sign our mailing list if you haven't already, so that you can get the newsletter and you can get all of our announcements. And I think that's it. I am Ingrid LaFleur. I'm the Chief Community Officer of EOS Detroit. Thank you again, Sean and Shane, for joining us. Have a good evening.